There's a man sitting at a desk in the middle of Dunder Mifflin who has not cared about a single thing happening around him in years, maybe decades. He does the crossword, he eats his pretzel, he stares at the clock the way you stare at something you've already accepted will never move fast enough, and the show plays it as comedy. Stanley Hudson, the grumpy guy, the guy who hates his job, the guy who once said he only has 3 things that get him through the day: pretzel day, 5 o'clock, and the moment Michael Scott stops talking. We laugh at him, we laugh with him, and we never stop to ask the one question that actually matters. What did this man have to survive to become this empty? Because here's the thing, Stanley Hudson is not lazy, he's not grumpy for no reason, and he is absolutely not a joke. What Stanley Hudson is a man who started with something real ambition, real self-worth, real fire, and got ground down so completely by a system that never saw him as a full person that the only way he could survive it was to stop caring entirely. On purpose. As a strategy, the emptiness is not a personality flaw, it's armor. And once you understand that, you can't watch a single Stanley scene the same way again. Let's start with the thing that hit me hardest when I actually sat down and thought about this character. Stanley is one of the only people in that office who is genuinely overqualified for what he's doing. Not in the way Jim is overqualified, where you feel the wasted potential like a slow bleed. Stanley's overqualification is different, it's quieter, and it's been sitting there for so long that even he has stopped mentioning it. He has been at Dunder Mifflin for years before the documentary crew ever shows up. He knows the job inside out. He could train anyone in that building. He probably has. He is not confused by the work, not challenged by it, not engaged by it. He completed his psychological relationship with paper sales a long time ago, and now he just shows up because showing up is what the mortgage requires. And here's what gets me. There is a version of Stanley Hudson's life where none of this happened, where the talent and the intelligence and the sheer emotional precision of this man, because you have to be emotionally precise to survive that office without losing your mind, landed somewhere that actually used him, but it didn't. And the show never really tells us why. It just shows us the result. A man who has replaced hope with routine. Think about how Stanley reacts to basically everything that happens in that office. Michael announces a mandatory fun event. Stanley's face doesn't move. Dwight launches into some deranged speech about beet farming and personal honor. Stanley does not look up from the crossword. Ryan starts a fire in the break room. Stanley evacuates at walking speed, not because he doesn't understand the danger, because he has done the math on whether his own life is worth rushing, and some days the calculation is closer than it should be. That is not comedy. That is a man who has been so thoroughly defeated by the gap between what his life was supposed to be and what it actually is that urgency feels pointless. There's a moment in the show that most people remember as a joke, but that I genuinely think is one of the most revealing things any character says in 9 seasons. Michael is trying to do some kind of motivational speech, and Stanley just looks at him and says something like, "I have been trying to get transferred to the Osprey branch for years. They'll let me know when something opens up." He says it completely flat. No emotion, no bitterness. Just a fact he's been carrying around long enough that it stopped hurting. He's been trying to leave for years, and it hasn't worked. And he keeps showing up anyway because what else is he going to do? That detail is everything. Because Stanley isn't someone who gave up and accepted his situation without a fight. He tried to get out, the door just didn't open, and after enough years of that, you stop running toward the door, you sit down, you do the crossword, you wait for 5 o'clock. Now here's where it gets really heavy, and this is the part that most people skip entirely when they talk about this character. Stanley Hudson is a black man in a predominantly white office, working under a white manager who is catastrophically unequipped to understand the basic professional needs of anyone around him, let alone someone whose experience of the working world has been shaped by a completely different set of pressures. The show doesn't go deep on this. It can't, really. It's a network comedy from the mid-2000s, and it mostly treats Stanley's race as background texture or occasional punchline. But if you pay attention, it's there. In every moment where Michael tries to connect with Stanley by being painfully, aggressively aware of his race, in every moment where Stanley's exhaustion reads differently, when you actually think about what it means to have spent decades being the person in the room who has to work twice as hard to be taken half as seriously. Because here's the thing about Stanley's disengagement that doesn't get said enough. His refusal to participate is also a form of resistance. He is not going to perform enthusiasm for a job that has never performed respect for him. He is not going to pretend that Michael Scott's feelings about the pretzel day motivational poster matter. He is not going to invest emotionally in an institution that has given him no real evidence that the investment would be returned. That's not laziness. That's a rational response to an irrational situation that has been going on long enough to calcify and the crossword puzzle.
Can we talk about the crossword puzzle for a second?
Because I think this is one of the most psychologically loaded recurring visual choices in the entire show, and it almost never gets analyzed seriously. Stanley does the crossword every single day at that desk. Every day. Not Sudoku. Not a word search. A crossword. A thing that requires actual intelligence, actual vocabulary, actual structured reasoning. A thing that takes time and focus and the ability to hold multiple moving pieces in your head simultaneously. He's not checked out. His brain is fully on. He just made a deliberate decision about what that brain is going to be used for. And the answer he arrived at was not paper sales, not Michael's improv exercises, not the annual Dundee Awards. The answer was this, right here. This puzzle that asks something of me and gives me something back. Think about what that tells you about a person. He found the one corner of his workday where the transaction was honest, where effort produced a result, where he was in control of what happened next. And he went there every single day and stayed there. That's not disengagement. That's survival. Quiet, precise, dignified survival. Now let's talk about the marriage, because if you're paying attention, this is where the show actually gives you the most honest version of who Stanley Hudson is underneath the armor. Stanley is having an affair. The show plays this, like so many things with Stanley, primarily for laughs. Michael finds out and Stanley panics in the most wonderfully un-Stanley way, suddenly energized, suddenly motivated, suddenly paying attention. And the joke is, oh, this is the one thing that can wake him up. Infidelity, adrenaline, but sit with it for a second longer than the laugh track gives you. Stanley has been in a marriage that isn't working for a long time. Long enough that he found someone else. Long enough that the affair became a regular enough feature of his life that it had its own internal logic, its own routine, almost. And the reason he panics when Michael finds out isn't just fear of getting caught. It's fear of losing the one thing in his daily existence that still makes him feel like a person someone wants, like a man who still has something to offer someone. His job doesn't make him feel that way. His office doesn't make him feel that way. And somewhere along the way, his marriage stopped making him feel that way too. That's a devastating picture when you actually look at it directly. A man so starved for the feeling of being genuinely chosen by another human being that he risked everything to find it. And then Terry finds out. The marriage continues. They try to work through it, and the show mostly moves on. But here's what stays with me. Stanley doesn't get a real reckoning with any of this. He doesn't have the conversation with himself that the audience gets to watch. He just absorbs it, like he absorbs everything, and keeps showing up, because that's what Stanley does. He keeps showing up even when the thing he's showing up for has hurt him. He showed up to Dunder Mifflin. He showed up to his marriage. He shows up to Pretzel Day like it is a religious obligation. He is, in his own way, one of the most stubbornly present people in that entire building. He just refuses to let you see what it costs him. And here's the thing that broke me when I went back through his arc in the later seasons. When Stanley finally retires, finally escapes, the show gives us a glimpse of what he goes to. Florida, painting, sitting in the sun. He remarries Lydia, someone who actually seems to see him. And in that brief flash of post-Dunder Mifflin Stanley, you see something on his face that you almost never see across 9 seasons. Peace, not happiness in a loud way. Not joy that needs an audience. Just the quiet, settled look of a man who has finally, after decades, been allowed to just exist without owing his existence to anyone else's bottom line. That moment hit me so much harder when I understood what he was leaving behind. Not just the job, the whole architecture of smallness that the job represented. The daily confirmation that his time was worth exactly as much as Dunder Mifflin decided to pay for it. No more, no less. He spent 30-something years in that building being reduced, and when it was over, when he finally walked out, the man who had been deliberately making himself smaller so that the disappointment would hurt less slowly started taking up space again. He painted, he made art, he created something. And here's what nobody really talks about. The things Stanley turns out to love in retirement, painting, leisure, the warmth of a place that doesn't feel like Scranton in November, these aren't new. These aren't things he discovered when he stopped working. These are things he buried. Things a younger Stanley Hudson probably had access to before the grind of a career that never quite fit started sanding them down. The man who sits at that desk doing the crossword and waiting for 5 o'clock is not who Stanley Hudson started as. That version of him was made, slowly, by the accumulation of years of being in the wrong place, undervalued, unseen, managed by someone who couldn't manage himself, surrounded by chaos he had no power to change and enough self-awareness to know it. He didn't check out because he was born without ambition. He checked out because ambition requires the belief that effort will be rewarded, and somewhere in Stanley Hudson's history, that belief ran out. The evidence stopped supporting it, and rather than keep spending emotional energy on debate that wasn't paying out, he redirected, internally, to the crossword, to the pretzel, to 5 o'clock, to the small, reliable pleasures that nobody could restructure away or put in a committee report. That's not giving up. That's a man managing his own psychology under impossible conditions with the tools available to him. And here's the last thing I want you to sit with. Stanley Hudson made people laugh for 9 seasons. The deadpan delivery, the slow burn, the refusal to pretend. All of it is genuinely funny, and I'm not saying it isn't. But the reason it's funny, the reason it lands is that it's true. Every audience member who ever worked a job they were overqualified for, every person who ever sat in a meeting that could have been an email, every human being who has ever watched the clock and felt the specific quiet desperation of time being sold by the hour to someone who doesn't fully appreciate what they're buying, they saw Stanley Hudson and they recognized something, not a character, a mirror. Stanley was funny because Stanley was real, because the thing the show was laughing at was also the thing a huge portion of the audience was quietly living, and Stanley, unlike most of us, had stopped pretending that was okay. He didn't perform enthusiasm, he didn't feel, he didn't manufacture gratitude for a situation that didn't deserve it. He looked at the gap between where he was and where he should have been, and he just sat in it, honestly, without apology. That's actually kind of brave when you think about it long long enough. Most of us are performing fine. Stanley Hudson had the audacity to stop, and if you ask me, the real reason everyone loves Stanley isn't because he's the grumpy guy. It's because somewhere underneath the crossword and the pretzel, and the complete refusal to engage with Michael Scott's feelings about the new motivational calendar, there is a man who deserved better than what he got, and he knew it. And he never let anyone make him forget it. He just waited, quietly, for 30 years. And then he went to Florida and he painted. And maybe finally that was enough. And maybe that's the real tragedy of Stanley Hudson. Not that he stopped caring. Not that he spent years counting down to 5 o'clock. Not even that he settled for a job that never saw his full worth. It's that somewhere along the way, a man who deserved more learned to expect less. Yet despite everything, he never completely lost himself. He held on to the small things that made life bearable until he finally found the freedom he had been waiting for all along. But what do you think? Was Stanley simply lazy and disengaged? Or was he one of the most quietly tragic characters in The Office? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.